Hey everyone, it's Crystal. Welcome back to my channel. And today I wanted to talk about some fairy tale retellings. So, November and December, and even into January, I really was into reading retellings. And I was trying to find some that I thought would be really, really good. And I had kind of like a mixture. There were several ones that I didn't like, but I did find a few that were okay. And then I found one that I really, really enjoyed. So I wanted to go over the different ones that I found and that I read and just to kind of tell you how I felt about them. So I read two Beauty and the Beast retelling. The first one, or I should say really, like one was a retelling and one was more of like inspired by. And the first one was A Ruin of Roses by K.F. Breen. And so A Ruin of Roses. So everyone in the town, they're shapeshifters, and the realm is protected by this like dragon shapeshifter. A demon comes and he puts a curse onto the prince and the king and the kingdom, and he also curses the town itself. I thought the premise of the story was really intriguing. And I really liked where the story was going at first. It definitely gave Beauty and the Beast vibes. And then it just sort of went off the rails. It became just smut on top of smut on top of smut. There in the story, the plot was just basically lost. And so I did not enjoy it. Didn't like it at all. So next I read A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. And I also read book 2 in that series. So A Court of Thorns and Roses, it was okay. It was okay. The main character, I liked like the premise of it. I liked the idea of her going and needing to break the curse, but I didn't really understand her and Tamlin's like relationship. So it didn't really feel like it was this like be all end all true love, and that Tamlin was like the one for her. And I had a really hard time with the curse because Tamlin had like this mask on his face, so everyone in his court was trapped inside of like these masks. That I didn't get. I had a hard time connecting with that. But the other part of the curse, I was totally fine with it. That didn't bother me. The whole premise of needing to break that curse, that part was fine. But the masks, didn't quite understand that. It was a little odd. It was also a little odd for me that some of the fairies could shapeshift, like Tamlin could shapeshift. So that was a little weird too for me. But it was way, way better than the first Beauty and the Beast retelling. That one, Court of Thorns and Roses, way better than the other one. And then I read A Court of Mist and Fury. And it was more enjoyable for me. I liked that way better than book 1 of the ACOTAR series. And still, I don't know if Sarah J. Maas, I don't know if her writing's for me. I don't know. I was intrigued by the end of A Court of Mist and Fury about how that ended and how, who her actual soulmate is and how Tamlin and her are at odds. So I enjoyed that story way better than the book 1. Will I continue that series? I don't know. We'll see. But then some other retellings that I read, or imaginings, if you will. So I read Emily McIntyre. I read 2 books by her. The first one I read was Wretched, and it was inspired by like The Wizard of Oz, and it's not really a retelling. So basically what Emily McIntyre does is she takes characters from these different like books or from the different Disney movies, and she imagines them as real life, human characters, and she updates it. So they're contemporary dark romances. So Wretched follows The Wizard of Oz, and you have Dorothy is not the good character. In fact, this is all about the Wicked Witch of the West, and her name is Evie. And so we have Evie is like the silent mastermind of her father's drug empire. And she has her older sister who took over the empire while their father was imprisoned, and she ends up getting killed. And Evie suspects that it was Dorothy who killed her sister, and she was very close to her older sister, and so she hates Dorothy. You have Nicholas, who is a cop who's supposed to be a good cop, but he's not. He's morally gray, and he ends up falling for Evie, even though Evie is a straight up villain. Like, there's no redeeming qualities about her at all. She's just straight up, she's a villain. But they fall for each other. And of course, Evie gets her happily ever after because Nicholas chooses her over like his career and everything else. This was like 3.5 stars for me. It wasn't my favorite. I didn't really like the plot, but I don't think I really like mafia type romances. And that's sort of like what this was. And then I read Hooked, which was another dark romance, also sort of mafia romance. But I liked the character development in Hooked way better. And so in Hooked, we have James Barry, who is known to the drug world and the underworld as Hooked. He's psychotic, and he murders people in horrific ways. He tortures them. But he is basically a villain who was definitely created by what everyone else did to him. And he was wronged by Peter Pan, who basically like killed his family, and then he got sent to his uncle, who was abusive and a horrible person. And so he kills his uncle, and then he kind of helps his mentor, who helped him and shaped him to like take over the drug world. But he plans on getting his revenge against Peter by using Peter's daughter. So I did not like the romance in this at all. It was sort of like Stockholm Syndrome. And it was abusive, it was manipulative. I did not like the romance. But I liked the character of Hook. It was very intriguing. It was very, like, getting into the mind of him as this killer. And again, no redeeming qualities. So if you like that sort of, like, psychological, like, what creates a killer? Are they created? Are they born? And I think you would really like that. Another book that was inspired by Peter Pan, and it was Darling, and it's a contemporary thriller. Can't talk today for some reason. I liked the diversity of the characters, and I really liked how the characters themselves were pretty true to the original Peter Pan like story and characters. The entire book basically takes place over like the course of one night. And we have Wendy, who has recently moved to Chicago. She's in a new environment. She's in a new house. And her house gets broken into by Peter. And he invites her to go to a party. Now, Wendy has been her whole life like super controlled and not allowed to go out and do anything. So this is like her one form of rebellion. Of course, things do not go the way they should. They turn out pretty horrific. The whole plot was, it was decent, but I wasn't the biggest fan of Wendy herself. And I didn't feel like we had enough to go on for her, and I didn't feel like there was enough depth for her in general. And she's, of course, the main character. So some fairy tale retellings that I absolutely enjoyed and loved. The first one is a 12 Dancing Princesses retelling, and it is by one of my new favorite authors. So Aaron Craig wrote A House of Salt and Sorrows. And we have Anna Lee. The book opens up. She is grieving the loss of her newest sister. You have had 4 sisters that have died, including their mother. And she just knows that her sister has been murdered. And so she is trying to investigate and figure out what has happened. And through the course of this, she finds like a portal to this other world where it's like glitz and glamour and dancing. And she realizes not everything is as it seems, and something isn't wrong. Isn't right. Something is very, very wrong. And the story kind of goes from there. It's a very gothic YA fantasy novel, and I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I read it in October. I have a whole review of it. It was great. The other book that I read by her is Small Favors, and it was inspired by Rumpelstiltskin. It's not really much of a retelling, but it is kind of based in the United States in like the early 1800s. And we have this girl. She is responsible for helping her dad and her family on like their farm, and they are living in this small community. And in the very beginning, they had sent out like a group to go and get supplies from the city. And they do this twice a year because they are very isolated. And things go very, very wrong. The whole group ends up getting slaughtered. One of their horses ends up coming back and it's horrifically wounded and it has to be put down. And so then there's this whole like, what do we do? How are we going to survive? There's this vote and they decide just to kind of ride out the winter, because when this main character, her dad goes to try and search, it's only him and his son, and he says, oh, there are beasts out in the woods. It's basically sort of like Rumpelstiltskin meets like The Lottery, but it was so well written. And I listened to the audio, and I absolutely loved the narrator for the audio. I highly recommend it. It gave just all the vibes, and it's a horror novel, and it's really about like the psychology of like humankind and how, when you're desperate and when humanity, like all of the rules are broken and everything has fallen apart and your world is ending and it's basically apocalyptic, how you basically turn on each other and you become just the worst part of mankind. And it was so good. So I highly, highly recommend Small Favors by Erin Craig. So that was all of the ones that I read from like November to January. I do have Thornhedge on my list. It is a Sleeping Beauty retelling. I plan on reading that this month. So super excited about that. But that is all I have for this video. So thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.